Hello and welcome to another GCSE PE related video with Mr. Matthews. In today's video, we will be talking about all things GCSE PE Paper 2. So you might recall seeing my exam revision, everything you need to know for Paper 1. This is a continuation of that video, but focusing specifically on Paper 2 topics. All of the topics that I am about to run through have been shared by AQA as topics that are likely to pop up in this year's exam. And before we begin, yes, you know what you need to do. You need to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell. That way you stay in the know and you receive new and exclusive, fun and informative videos. Woo! Let's begin today's video by talking about skill classification. Skill classification is all about categorizing different skills based on the factors that have an influence on them. So for example, some skills are quite easy and straightforward to carry out. Some are more difficult. Some are affected by the environment and some are not. And here is some work I did earlier. So what you can see, I have drawn a number of lines, and at the end of each of these lines, I have noted a word. So if we look at my first example, at one end of the line, we have good on the left-hand side, and at the opposite end, we have bad. So this line is like a continuum. So what you will see at either end is polar opposites. In my second example, we have hot and cold. And in my third example, we have day and night. Now, I've used those examples just to give you something to think about. Now, what you need to know is you need to know the difference between a basic skill and a complex skill. A basic skill is a simple, straightforward, easy skill to carry out and can involve things like jogging, walking, and jumping on the spot. And what makes these skills basic is that they require very few decisions in order to perform them successfully. So for this reason, basic skills are likely to be used by beginners, people completing these skills for the first time. At the opposite end of my line, or continuum if you like, we have complex skills. Complex skills are skills that are more difficult, they are more challenging to carry out, and this is because they require many decisions. Now, complex skills are more likely to be used by elite performers, and the reason being is because over time they have progressed. They have many experiences of performing such actions, so for that reason it's easier for them to do. So let's take a triple jumper, for example. The process of actually completing a triple jump is a very difficult thing to do. However, for an elite performer who has had years and years of practice, it becomes second nature. It becomes a lot easier. And the reason why triple jump is a complex skill is because not only does it involve a run up, a takeoff, but then the performer has to perform a hop, skip, and jump. So multiple decisions have to be made, which makes it a very challenging thing to do. The final thing you need to know for this topic is the difference between an open-ended skill and a closed skill. So an open-ended skill is a skill that's influenced, that's affected by the environment. So let's take an example from football. If I'm in a competitive situation where I'm passing the ball over 5, 10, 15, 20 yards, it's not as simple as just carrying out the process of performing a pass. I have to think about where my teammates are. I have to think about the opposing players. Is there someone shutting me down? Is there someone standing between the player that I am attempting to pass the ball to? So all of these things have an influence, they have an impact on the decisions that I make. So if there was a person from the opposing team standing between myself and the person receiving the ball, that might determine the decision that I make. So I might decide in that scenario to actually loft the ball so they cannot make an interception. And at the opposite end of my line, we have closed skills. So closed skills are the opposite. They are not affected by the environment. So let's take a performer carrying out a gymnastics routine. From start to finish, the routine remains exactly the same because there are no players to influence or affect the decision made by the gymnast. So for this reason, this is an example of a closed skill because the gymnast's decisions are not affected by the environment. The information processing model is a 4-stage model. Let's begin with input. So input is all about our senses, what information we take in from our surroundings. So if I put myself in a game of tennis and my opponent sends a forehand volley to my right hand side, it involves me looking at the tennis ball and recognizing that the ball is moving towards my right hand side, and taking into account information about the speed of the ball, the flight, the position it's likely to land, and so on. Decision making is all about selecting the appropriate response based on long-term memory. So with years of practice, what we begin to do is we begin to store memories. And what this means is when we're in certain situations, our bodies naturally know what to do in response to a particular stimuli. So in this scenario, what will start to happen is electrical impulses will be sent from my brain to the relevant muscles. And this is where output begins to kick in. So as those electrical impulses are sent to the relevant muscles, as I have taken the information in, recognizing that the ball is going to my right hand side, it starts to happen. So my legs and feet move to the right hand side. I watch the ball and I manipulate my hand and rack it into a position so I can hopefully successfully return the ball. Now, once that's happened, we reach something called feedback. And feedback can happen in two forms. It can happen intrinsically and it can happen extrinsically. Intrinsically means feedback from within. So that sense of success and satisfaction knowing that you have done something well when returning the shot. And it might be that you've successfully scored a point, and for that reason you know you've been successful because clearly from within you feel that success as you achieve a point. Extrinsic feedback is slightly different. So this is feedback provided by external sources. So it might be that a teacher, a friend, a coach, a parent says, "Well done, Mr. Matthews. What a shot. That was a fantastic shot." So that is feedback that we receive externally. So that is an example of extrinsic feedback. Engagement patterns of different social groups and factors affecting participation. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is age. Now, clearly, as you get older, as you sort of reach your 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, you become less mobile. For that reason, you're a lot less likely to play sports that are high intensity and that are incredibly physical. So you're less likely to play sports like football and rugby, and more likely to play sports like darts and bowls because naturally those games involve less movement and they are less physical. Teenagers, if you're lucky enough to be a teenager or you're in your 20s, then you're more likely to play sports that are high intensity and that have an element of physicality because you're younger, you're fitter, you can clearly meet the demands of those types of games. So you're more likely to play those sports at a younger age, but that might change as you get older. If we move on to our next subtopic, gender. Now, I know as a PE teacher and through experiences in PE and through research that I've done, males typically have more opportunities in a broader range of sports than their female counterparts. So, of course, male uptake and involvement in sport and exercise is likely to be greater. But what I would also highlight is if we think about some of the very best sports in the world, football being one, the recognition given to the men's game in comparison to the females' game is astronomical. As a result of the increased exposure, men clearly generate more revenue for their sports teams than women do for theirs. And then we have religion and culture. So these two are closely intertwined. And I actually did a project at my university, a 10,000 word project, and I looked at Muslim girls' participation rates in extracurricular sport, and I looked at religion, and I looked at culture, and I looked at the roles they play in sports participation in school, but also outside of school. So some of the things that I found that pose the problem were fasting, obviously, during the month of Ramadan, and completely understandable. If you can't eat or drink, you're more than likely going to avoid doing sport and exercise because you don't want to make yourself unnecessarily hungry or thirsty. What I also found in particular cultures, there's a real emphasis on education and subjects that are deemed to be academic. So for some people from certain backgrounds, PE and sport is not a priority, and for that reason they're less likely to do it. What I also found is some of the girls that I spoke to and interviewed had roles in the home, and not only that, they had to pick up their younger siblings after school from neighbouring schools, and for that reason they didn't have the time to attend extracurricular sports. What was also really important to these girls is that PE lessons were single-sexed, and that obviously they had a safe place to not only get changed, but a place that they could do PE without being in the presence of boys. And this was very, very important during swimming. So for a lot of the girls that I spoke to, they said that they would just clearly avoid swimming if they had to do it in the presence of boys. And this was also down to clothing arrangements and showing a bit too much skin. So I mention all of this because it's really important that we consider each of these things when talking about the impact that religion and culture can have on sports participation, because things like this could potentially hinder future participation for young girls, especially from the Muslim community. So very important things that we need to think about. Ethnicity can also have a huge impact on the sports people choose to partake in. So it's no secret, I'm sure you've watched the Olympics many times before. More often than not, especially with the short distance events, 100 meters, 200 meters, the field is dominated by people from an African Caribbean background. And that's because they possess the traits, the qualities that are needed to be successful. So they're quick, they're powerful, they're strong, and they're fast. So these are all credentials that are very useful when sprinting. And then if we were to change the context slightly, so if you think about swimming, now more often than not, the best swimmers are people from sort of European backgrounds or from the United States of America and so on. Usually white athletes, and the reason being is biologically they are more buoyant. And then we have role models. Role models can be parents, teachers, coaches, siblings, friends, and people that we look up to that play for our favourite sports teams. If you do not have them in place, you are less likely to partake in sport and physical activity because they ultimately influence you and inspire you to pursue a future in sport. So if they're not in place, if you have parents that had really bad experiences of PE in school and they share these experiences with you, it might hinder the way you see PE and sport, and for that reason it might have an impact on your future involvement. Access. Growing up as a young male in London, I live so close to so many professional football clubs, semi-professional football clubs, and grassroots football clubs. So naturally, it was very easy for me as a young male interested in sport. It was very easy for me to join a football team. Now, if I were born in a place like Austria, France, Switzerland, where there are numerous mountains, and if I lived in close proximity to those mountains, it's highly likely that I'd be into skiing and snowboarding as opposed to playing the football that I currently do. So it's all about accessibility. What you have on your doorstep is likely to influence the sports that you play going forwards. Income also plays a massive role in the sports we play. It's no secret, sports like tennis and skiing are very expensive because you have to buy lots of specialist equipment. Not only that, but tennis and skiing is done by an individual. So it's one person that has to take on all of the costs. If you are part of a football team, obviously 16, 17, 18 players might make up a squad and potentially more. So for that reason, the money that's spent is spread across a number of players, which makes the cost of playing football a lot cheaper. Not only that, if we link it to accessibility, there are a lot more football pitches locally than ski slopes. So if we were to compare travel costs alone, we would naturally incur more costs for skiing because we'd have to travel further afield. And then finally, we have disability. Obviously, for those people that have particular disabilities, they can't partake in competition with those that don't. And that's why we have events like the Paralympics and adapted sports like wheelchair basketball to help create a level playing field and opportunities to play, which is absolutely great. However, one thing that I would say for a wheelchair user, accessibility. So actually getting to a location will be more challenging, and actually finding sports teams that are specifically created for wheelchair users will also be more challenging. So this could easily pose a barrier to lifelong participation in sport. So just to recap, everything just mentioned: age, gender, religion, culture, ethnicity, role models, access, income, disability can cause problems. They can create barriers for selected groups, and this can have an impact on their lifelong participation in sport. Commercialization of sport. Let's begin by talking about the golden triangle. Now, this is something you should be familiar with. We have sport, media, and sponsorship, and ultimately they go hand in hand and they benefit financially from one another. Sponsors pay sports teams and also provide them with products that they will promote. They promote this through displaying the brands and logos on sports equipment and kit. This is seen through the media, and this is shared with large audiences, which means large audiences see the sponsors' logos and brands, and they are therefore more likely to use the product or buy the product. Okay, sports benefit from the media because sports teams obviously have their performances shared with the world, and this could result in increased shirt sales. And then the media write up contracts with sports teams, and the media make more money because they play competitive fixtures, and as a result they generate larger audiences, which means greater engagement, and that results in increased revenue for companies like Sky Sports News and BT Sport. And let me give you another example outside of the football world. If we think Anthony Joshua, one of the best British fighters of all time, he has a massive contract with Under Armour. Now, Under Armour have been a massive company in America for a long time. I remember being out there years ago working, and every child that I worked with had Under Armour trainers, they had Under Armour t-shirts, and so on. Now, it's only in recent years that Under Armour has started to become a big and popular store in the UK. Now, I might assume that that could be a result of Anthony Joshua being one of the faces of Under Armour, because people tie Under Armour with Anthony Joshua. Now, if Anthony Joshua can wear an Under Armour t-shirt, then why can't I? So for that reason, people are more likely to buy the products that Under Armour are selling because of Anthony Joshua proudly endorsing and supporting the product. Another example I might share with you, Mo Farah, Corn. Now, Mo Farah, we know, was an unbelievable endurance athlete, running marathons, half marathons, 1500 meters, and so on. Now, knowing that at that particular time, he was probably one of the fittest people in the world, if Corn is good enough for him, and he is seen to be the face of Corn, which is all about nutrition and food that we might consume and food that contains high levels of protein, then again, the person at home, the consumer, is more likely to buy the product, because if it's good enough for Mo Farah, one of the best athletes in the world, then of course it's going to be good enough for the average Joe that sat at home. Now, I've mentioned individuals for you. Let's go bigger. Let's think teams and clubs. If we go back to football, Manchester City, what's their home ground called? Yes, it's called the Etihad. If we think Arsenal Football Club, what's it called? It's called the Emirates Stadium. Okay, so constantly, when we think about the home grounds of these particular football clubs, we're not just thinking about Arsenal and Manchester City now. We're naturally thinking about the Etihad, which is a massive organisation, which is obviously the face of Manchester City. We're thinking about the Emirates, which is also another massive organisation associated with Arsenal Football Club. So let's move on and think about sports and sporting events and cup competitions. These cup competitions are constantly being renamed. Let me have a look at my iPad for you. So in 2004 to 2012, Carling sponsored what you know as the Carabao Cup. In 2012 to 2016, it was Capital One. In 2016 to 17, there was no main title sponsor, which is quite interesting. So it was called the English Football League Cup. And in 2017, up until this point, Liverpool were the most recent winners, if you didn't know. So up until this point, to 2024, the cup is now called the Carabao Cup. I could honestly talk about commercialisation all day long. There are so many real life examples that you might be aware of that I haven't actually mentioned. So feel free to drop them in the comment section and ask a question if you feel the need to do so. And before we move on, I just wanted to summarize some of the key points, some of the key facts that you might put in your answers in response to a question about commercialization. So looking at the positives and negatives, I might occasionally have a look at my left-hand side just to recall some of these points for you. So firstly, of course, through commercialization, we become more aware of a product and a service. Okay, so therefore are more likely to use the service or buy the product. We become more aware, and not only that, but it actually promotes a positive image of a company. If we're really interested in a particular sport and that sport is associated with a company, we are likely to have a positive perception of that company. And of course, because of commercialization, there is always going to be increased sales, revenue, and financial gain for these companies. Now, the negatives. Investment is uncertain. It is not always guaranteed. If in any sport you go further down the pyramid, so you go into the lower leagues, the lower divisions, it is always incredibly difficult to get sponsorship deals because the bigger companies, the bigger organizations sponsor the best divisions and the best sports teams because they are likely to be more popular and therefore generate more revenue for the sponsor. Also, if an event is interrupted, this could result in reduced media exposure, which means advertisement of a product is lost. So this could potentially affect sales. And also, bad publicity associated with a sport or a sports performer could negatively impact on a sponsor. So let's look at a recent example. Zuma in recent months kicked a cat, and this was shared all over social media platforms. And as you can imagine, quite rightly so, people went absolutely mad. And for that reason, Adidas actually withdrew their sponsorship deal with Zuma because rightly so, they do not want to be associated with such poor behavior. Positive and negative impacts of technology on sponsors. So as technology has evolved, there are more cameras in stadiums across the globe, and as a result you clearly pick up more angles when watching on TV at home, so therefore you are more likely to see logos and brands. Due to this increased exposure, you are more likely to see the service or product being advertised and are therefore more likely to use it, and of course this results in increased revenue for the sponsor. And on to the negatives. Players are constantly under the microscope via media. And for that reason, any poor performances, poor behavior, cheating, and even losing can be picked up quite easily. And for that reason, this can reflect badly on the sponsors. Prohibited substances, diuretics. Diuretics are used to remove excess water from the body, and they are also useful because they mask other drugs, so they hide other substances that might be in the bloodstream. They are usually used by boxers, so boxers that want to get into a lighter weight category, and they are also used by jockeys. Jockeys obviously want to be as light as they possibly can to make it easier for their horses to travel quickly during a race. Diuretics can cause cramp and dehydration. Blood doping. Blood doping is not a drug, but it's a method used by athletes to gain an unfair advantage. So what does it involve? Weeks leading up to competition, they remove 2 pints of blood from their body and they insert this into a freezer. What they do 1 to 2 days before competition is they reinsert this blood. Now, before they've done this, the body has this amazing ability to replace the blood that's been lost. And within that blood, you have red blood cells. So ultimately, when the athlete has put this blood back into their body, they have too much blood and too many red blood cells. What do red blood cells do? They carry oxygen. So when they take part in a long-lasting event, they are likely to experience less fatigue, which ultimately improves their stamina. This is likely to be used by athletes that do long-lasting events, so marathon runners and long-distance cyclists. Side effects include thickening of the blood, which can cause heart attacks. Beta blockers reduce the effects of adrenaline and reduce heart rate and muscle tension. So these drugs are most likely to be used by athletes that carry out small, precise, accurate and controlled actions. So these drugs are best suited to athletes like snooker players, darts throwers and archers because they need to be calm, precise and accurate when carrying out their skills. Side effects associated with beta blockers include nausea, tiredness and poor circulation. Anabolic agents, aka steroids. These are used in order to improve muscle mass, strength and power, and they also support recovery following an intense session. Anabolic agents are likely to be taken by weightlifters, bodybuilders and short distance runners because they all require power and strength. Side effects include more aggression, males experiencing a decrease in testicle size, women developing more hair, and it can also result in liver and kidney damage. Stimulants improve reaction time, so they help make performers more alert, and they are likely to be used by 100-meter sprinters as they need a good reaction time when leaving the blocks. Side effects include heart problems, the chance of stroke, and addiction. Narcotic analgesics. These are incredibly strong painkillers and ultimately can be used by any athlete that wishes to play through injury. Narcotics include morphine and heroin. Side effects include loss of concentration, low blood pressure, and addiction. Peptide hormones, EPO. EPO stimulates red blood cell production in the bone marrow, and this naturally occurs in each of us. Now, if you imagine that I take an injection of EPO, what I am ultimately doing is I'm increasing that stimulation. So what happens in the bone marrow is we produce more red blood cells. Going back to blood doping, we said that red blood cells have this ability to carry oxygen. So if I suddenly have more red blood cells, I will ultimately have better stamina because more oxygen will be delivered to working muscles. So EPO is likely to be used by marathon runners, long distance cyclists and long distance swimmers. And again, side effects include thickening of the blood, and of course this is more likely to lead to a heart attack. Hooliganism is described as being rowdy, disruptive, out of control, aggressive and violent behaviour. Now, there are a number of reasons why hooliganism takes place. Drugs, alcohol, gang culture, rivalries, tribal behaviour, and frustration. It's a known fact that drugs and alcohol lessen inhibition. So basically what that means is following the consumption of alcohol and drugs, people are likely to behave differently. They are less aware of their surroundings, so are more likely to display aggressive and unacceptable behaviour. Rivalries, gang culture, and tribal behaviour are all closely interlinked. So just envisage that you're at a football stadium and you're surrounded by thousands of people that support the same football club as you. Now, in that situation, there's a sense of loyalty, there's a sense of belonging, because you're suddenly surrounded by people that are passionate about exactly the same sports team that you are. So what happens in this moment is you lose your sense of individuality. So rather than behaving the way that you normally would, you're likely to behave in a slightly different way because you start to conform and behave like certain people around you. Now let's make this situation a little bit more spicy. If this is a local London derby, let's say Tottenham versus Arsenal, Arsenal are playing at the Emirates and Tottenham score in the 90th minute to then win 1-0. And Arsenal players and fans are incredibly frustrated, more so the fans with the way that perhaps the players have played or the way the official was played. And then Tottenham fans are in the away end celebrating, screaming, shouting. How do you think Arsenal fans might respond to that? Now, if you also, on top of that frustration, add drugs and alcohol, as well as a sense of belonging and the tension built up from this rivalry that's been in place for years, how might that then impact on fans' behaviour? I'll leave that with you and give you something to think about. So how do the authorities combat hooliganism? There are a number of tactics that they use. Firstly, they use CCTV. CCTV cameras are in all stadiums and surrounding areas. And the idea being that they are in place to act as a deterrent, but if anything were to happen, then the authorities can look at the footage, review it, and establish who was involved and exactly what happened. Secondly, we have stewards. So stewards normally stand in stadiums and stand outside the stadiums. They are there to help, but they stand in bright high-vis jackets. So they are clearly there to be noticed and hopefully again act as a deterrent. Police again are stood in stadiums and stood in surrounding areas to help manage fans and again act as a deterrent, but to be in place in case anything were to happen so they can deal with it as quickly and efficiently as possible. There are police dogs in place as well to help sniff out drugs and weapons that might be used by hooligans. We then have horses. Now, horses are very useful for a number of reasons. One, they help manage crowds, but they also help police officers see over a long distance so they can see what's happening ahead. It's almost like a bird's eye view, if you like. And they can also employ tactics to force fans from one area to another if they decide to charge towards fans. Helicopters do provide a bird's eye view inside the stadium, outside the stadium, so they can monitor whether there's any trouble inside the stadium or outside, and they will also be able to identify who is involved. Authorities use artificial intelligence, so they will be fully aware of people that have been involved in previous trouble, and they're more likely to step in before things happen because they know that certain people are likely to be involved, especially when games are played in Europe. So when fans from the UK go to places like Spain, Italy and Germany, the police, you can guarantee the police in the UK will be in contact with the police forces in those countries, and they will share information about each of those fan bases and people that are likely to cause concern. We then have fan segregation. So fans are obviously in the home end if they're supporting the home team, and away fans are given their small allocation. And you will usually have police forces and stewards standing around the away fans, and they act as a barrier, again, to prevent any trouble from taking place. But if it were to happen, they are there on hand to hopefully resolve the issue very, very quickly. Easier said than done. They have also, the authorities, some time ago now, have altered kickoff times. And once upon a time when I was growing up, pretty much every single league game would be on a Saturday afternoon. But now we have a Saturday lunchtime kickoff, we have a Friday evening, we have a Sunday evening. And a lot of that is because of TV rights, but they've also moved kickoff times earlier, especially where they think there's likely to be issues. And the reason being is that it, in their mind, reduces the chance of fans drinking because pubs are closed. So the idea being that when fans arrive at the venue for, let's say, a football game, they're less likely to be violent and aggressive because in their minds, they have consumed less drugs and alcohol. But obviously there's ways around that, but it's in place to prevent fans from becoming intoxicated. So hopefully in turn to reduce aggressive and violent behaviour. Nutrition. Carbohydrates should make up 55 to 60% of your daily intake. And carbohydrates are typically foods like bread, pasta, and rice. Now, carbohydrates are the main energy source and they are used in all types of exercise and at all intensities. Fat should make up 25 to 30% of your daily intake, and it is a greater energy source than carbohydrates, but it can only be used as an energy source for low intensity exercise. And then finally, we have protein. Protein comes in the form of chicken, tuna, turkey. And this should make up 15 to 20% of your diet, and it is essential for repair of muscles during rest and recovery. So if you take part in an intense workout, I would highly recommend that you consume high amounts of protein following this workout to support the repair and growth of those muscles. And then you have vitamins and minerals that consist of fruits and vegetables. And these are useful for general body systems and helping them to work efficiently. Vitamins and minerals are also essential for general health, including the immune system, skin, nails, and hair. Reasons for maintaining hydration, and let me begin with the hydration definition. So hydration refers to having enough water in the body. So we require a water balance in order to function adequately. Dehydration refers to excessive loss of water through sweat and urine. Now this clearly has an impact on our bodies. And as such, the first thing that might happen is that blood thickens. And for this reason, blood cannot travel as efficiently as it once did. So for this reason, heart rate also increases in order to move blood from point A to point B more efficiently. Now, due to a lack of water in the body temperature increases, and there is an increased chance of fatigue and cramp. On top of this, reaction time is likely to increase because the person is experiencing fatigue, so they slow down. Guys, well done. You've made it to the end, and I hope you found this video helpful. And if you did, please do not be afraid of hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell. As always, if you have any questions, please put them in the comment section below, and I will be more than happy to assist you like Trent Alexander-Arnold does for Mo Salah. Guys, thank you for tuning in. Good luck in your paper 2 exam. I wish you all the best. See you soon. Bye-bye.